Welcome to today's episode of Centering Conversations, where we celebrate the voice, vision, and value of Black women leading in philanthropy. Our guest today is a powerhouse in the space, Dr. Sherece West-Scantlebury. She has spent more than 25 years driving systems change, leveraging philanthropy as a tool for justice, and investing in Black communities to build a more equitable future. Her leadership embodies the resilience and brilliance of Black women who are not only shaping the sector, but redefining its purpose, moving beyond charity towards lasting, transformative impact. She has been a champion for racial and economic justice, an advocate for policy change, and a mentor to the next generation of leaders. Her work and influence extends across boardrooms, grassroots movements, and a national conversation on equity. She holds a PhD in public policy from the University of Maryland, a master's degree in public policy from the University of Michigan, and a bachelor's degree from Bowie State University. She is a voice of power, she is a visionary for change, and a testament to the value that Black women bring to philanthropy and beyond. Welcome to the podcast. Sherece, thank you so much for being on Centering Conversations. This podcast is a partnership between Voice, Vision, Value and Conversations with Chanda. For me, it's just a delight. I have these moments where, in these conversations where all of them are sort of connections being made by our dear Toya Randall.
She's the best.
She is the best. Some of the conversations I have bring up different memories, but this conversation with you brings up the time where I was just coming into formal philanthropy, and Toya invited me to attend the Black Women in Philanthropy retreat in Florida. Mm-hmm. I had not yet started.
Okay.
In my role. I was about a week away from being on my first day. Went down there to find this wonderful community of women. And I might say more about that experience as we go along, because I was able to see how you all were engaging in philanthropy and with each other from an outside point of view. Mm-hmm. That I began to understand more as I moved through my roles. So it is just a delight to have you.
Well, wonderful. And thank you. And you are terrific and have been fabulous in the field. So thank you for joining it. And of course, Toya is just the best God ever made. So I'm very appreciative for this opportunity. And Toya, along with myself, Karen, Gladys, Susan, founded the APFI Black Women in Philanthropy Retreat experience.
Yeah, I did know that. And can you just share with us what led you to that moment?
Sure. So this would be going way back in the Wayback Time Machine. So I don't even know if I can give you an actual date. Karen and Karen McNeil Miller, who is head of the Colorado Health Foundation. At that time, she was the head of the K.P. Reynolds Foundation. And she and we became friends, colleagues, and had this conversation. I remember we were at a booth. I remember sitting across, but again, I cannot tell you where that conference was or anything else. And she was the one who said, we should consider having a Black Women in Philanthropy retreat and at that time, it was for CEOs. Because, and I probably could predict this time, so I've been in philanthropy now over 30 years. Started out when I was 12. So over 30 years. And I can remember early on in my career where you could not count Black CEOs, man or woman. Mm. Then it became a point where, it was just me, Karen, Janine Lee, and, a few others. Then you could maybe get to, including men, you might be able to get to 12. You still weren't at 20 yet. Then it progressed. And so when we fast forward, by the time Karen and I had this conversation, at least there were enough women, not a lot, but a few women to say, we really need a space where we can just talk. Like, what does it mean to be a Black woman CEO, whether you're a CEO or deputy, but anywhere in that high C-suite, working in this very patriarchal institution of philanthropy? And there are challenges. Not saying our white sisters don't have challenges, not saying our Latino sisters don't have, not saying our Asian sisters don't. Everybody got to struggle, everybody got a challenge. But coming together in a homogeneous group where we can go, what the hell? You know,
Yep.
In a space that's safe, in a space that you don't have to give background and foreground for the conversation because we're all having a similar experience working for these mainly white boards. And again, in a patriarchal way. I mean, philanthropy, along with banking and a few others, it's absolutely a white founded, white led still institution. Mm-hmm. And, to be a leader in that institution, especially when you're countercultural, is just hard. And so she and I talked about it. And then she said, we should talk to Susan about it. Because by then Susan was this president of AbbVie. I think she was by then. It could have still been Ken. And, we mentioned it. It didn't quite go anywhere. But then we got Gladys and Susan, and we talked some more about it. By that point, we brought Toya in, and, we celebrated 10 years. I think 2 years ago, it was 10 years. And the 10th anniversary one was in St. Croix.
Yeah, I missed that one. And I'm sad that I did. And you brought up Miss Gladys Washington, who she was a guest on Centering Conversations. When I met with her, I could not help but talk about her bottle of Hennessy and the laughter and the ease. And what I realized in reflection, she has gone on to be an ancestor, but her legacy has just woven through this world in such a deliberate way. But what I remember is coming into a new space with women I didn't know who were in the C-suite that had collectively given each other permission to show up as themselves. Mm-hmm. And Gladys was right in the middle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was right in the middle. There's no pretentiousness here. I'm going to have my little Hennessy. I'm going to use whatever words I feel like using. Yep. And I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to claim my space here for us and for you. And just so unapologetic that it was an opening for me in terms of how the work could look. So just God bless her soul and everything that she's ever done. Because she's just a diamond.
Yeah, she was beautiful. And I tell you a quick story. I was cussing somebody out in my head recently, but I channel Gladys and how I cuss people out in my head now.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So her legacy is long and beautiful, and even how she shows up in philanthropy, pro-Black, pro-women, mentoring, open. I try to model myself after who she was. I still can't say was. I wanted to say is, right? So yeah, because her legacy still is.
It is.
And modeled it quite a bit. And and I've been cussed out by her a couple of times, so I can channel the cuss out, and it's actually pretty funny.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the countercultural piece, because I think that as philanthropy diversifies its leadership, based on where some of the investments are going, people can believe that it is more inclusive than what it is. And mm-hmm. So can you just say a little bit about particularly the governance model, or trying to show up in a countercultural way, and what that navigation has been like for you, or as you understood it for other women of color, other Black women?
Sure. So, it's countercultural in a couple of ways. I don't know all the numbers, and this is something we would have to ask Susan at APFI or Council on Foundations to really, really check. I want to say, and again, I don't know this for certain, I doubt if we are in the double digits of foundation CEOs of color. I'm not just Black. I'm talking about Latin, Asian, Pacific Islanders, who I know gets grouped in with Asians, all. I don't know this. And if it were in the double digits, I would imagine it's not 20%, right? It's probably somewhere hovering at between 10 and 15%. So we're talking about out of 2,000 plus foundations, you get this percentage. So again, inherently, it is a white founded, led cultural institution. So that's one in terms of just the numbers of CEOs, because you could look at myself, you can look at William Bell at the Casey Family Programs, you can look at Lisa Hamilton at Casey, our sister at Kellogg, who I love and adore and just lost her name just that fast. Lejeune at Kellogg. So, you can look at those and go, oh, we got diversity, right? And there's some family foundation, a few other foundations and some tiers, right? You could just be like, wow, you can go to the APFI conference and see that conference has, again, when I started out, we could barely get 100 people to come to that. And it wasn't even a conference, it was a meeting. Now it is actually an actual standalone conference that is approaching 800 participants. I'm sure it'll get to 1,000 prayerfully soon. So you can look at that and go, wow, there's a lot of diversity. But you're taking a homogeneous group that's gathering. You put that same homogeneous group in, let's say, a COF or a broader convening about the field. And then you see like, oh, wow, no, this is not a lot of folk at all. Mm-hmm. So as we go into meetings, discussions, and I'll just speak for myself, but going into and those that I hear from, it's this constant, it can be a constant battle. Oh, and let me also mention BoardSource does its study every few years on who's on boards. And this is nonprofit boards writ large. Nonprofit boards are still populated by mainly white men. And that is absolutely true for foundation boards. So when we're trying to use resources, especially in this moment in time around equity, and I'm not speaking about specifically racial equity or economic equity or, education equity. I just mean the word equity, ensuring that all have access and opportunity, all, like the basic generation of what equity is. Mm-hmm. So in our case, it's that all Arkansans have access to opportunity. When we talk about that all, we find that we are pushing against folk who never really wanted all. And folk who see the world still in a place of benevolence and charity and patriarchy. So we still have foundations that refuses to fund general operating support. Like my 30-year fight in philanthropy, if anything, has been let's fund general operating support along with others. This moment in history, that retraction that we're seeing, none of them folks wanted to do it in the first place. They didn't want to do it in the first place. This now becomes that opportunity to go, we out. Because you can see how easily and how fast the out is being done and not the fight. Because we're in a structure that is built off of white wealth, and I'm not trying to characterize all white people or all white people in philanthropy, but a significant majority of these folk probably had to be cajoled and talked into a philanthropy and a racial equity, equity and a racial equity agenda to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so many foundations spent so much time defining equity, getting down to what it means about equity, studying equity. You spend so much time on that. Anytime a foundation spends more than a month on a topic, it means they probably don't want to do it to begin with. Like, you can thoroughly study a whole lot of stuff, and I'm all for that. Community building, education, and the like. You can thoroughly study all that stuff. I agree, you need to do that to develop strategy, but you do not need no damn 2 years. You don't.
No.
You absolutely don't.
No.
When that study becomes too long and arduous and debating it and talking about it, that means, yeah, y'all ain't want to do this. Y'all ain't want to do this. Mm-hmm. So this moment in time shows us again that this white-led institution is behaving as a white-founded institution in this country behaves. It's not doing anything different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so as Black women in this space, we're coming in, we see it different. We know different. We have proximity, and we're having to navigate against the reluctance of dealing with the all, serving the all, or there's a charitable lens that in fact can also be very harmful.
Absolutely. Because when we're talking about equity and you're talking about closing gaps or disparities, again, whichever word, and I know that now we're changing verbiage to say everything but equity. So we're using 3 or 4 words to say what one word can do, right? So as we think about pushing that agenda and those disparities, that is not a 1-year grant for a food kitchen. Because if you're asking the question, why do women of color have maternal health challenges more so than white women? That is not a one-time grant that you can take a photo op for. Mm-hmm. That's actually a systemic question. So equity kind of pushes foundations that were on that charitable track to be transformative and to have systems thinking. When philanthropy wants to stay in that place of, I'm giving you this grant out of, again, benevolence, charity, they're not giving it out of change or wanting to make a difference. They're doing it out of wanting to be a good corporate citizen, feel good, don't have debate, don't want to have controversy. Like, when you're doing grant making in that way, you're not going to get to equity. Right. Because you're not going to 1 year programmatically change disparities or outcomes in your region or country. You're not going to do that by funding in that way. So equity forced a behavior change that many were reluctant to do in the first place. Yeah. So if you do it right.
Yeah. I love these conversations because I never really know. I always have questions and I never know which direction it's going to go. But what's coming up for me is it's the 20th anniversary of Katrina. Mm-hmm. I know that you were very instrumental during that period of time and recovery. I'm in Minnesota. We are coming up on the 5th year since the murder of George Floyd. Mm-hmm. In both moments, philanthropy acted different.
But did they?
So let's talk about that. Did they act different?
Mm-hmm. Because, again, long-term systemic change is not the same as responding to a catastrophe. So, the George Floyds, Michael Browns, all of those things that occurred over time that got people's attention around policing and Black communities and Black men in policing. And, there's all kinds of ways to carve that. It was responsive to a moment, but it wasn't change. So I don't know all that you all did with George Floyd and the like. I don't know all the ins and outs because I just observed it from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
Change for that would have been, or could have looked like, I'm just giving a scenario, where you all were actually funded for some period of time to delve into how do we make sure this doesn't happen again. I don't know this for a fact. Again, I just know it anecdotally. Even those funders in your region couldn't respond. And it actually took some outsiders who did try to push some systems change, to respond in a way. So it just bodes for, what are we really doing in philanthropy? So if we go back to Katrina, one of the reasons the Foundation for Louisiana was created was because there was not a transformative grant maker in Louisiana at that time. We had the Greater New Orleans Foundation, the Baton Rouge Foundation, and there were few other community foundations in the state that were focused on opera, housing development, which is a good thing, but housing development, it was project-based. It was, and again, these are donor-advised funds and the like. You don't find many donors who are donor-advised funds who really want to dig into why girls aren't faring well. In other words, those questions, the systemic transformative questions, were not being asked prior to Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
Katrina, then, the governor who created what became the Foundation for Louisiana, and those that were organized, and I was included in that were organized to help respond. We were asking the question that was about systems and building back Louisiana. How do we ensure that building back Louisiana is inclusive and equitable? That was the question 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
No one else was asking that question.
Mm-hmm.
Because local funders, and there's no harm. We need our museums. We need our hospitals. We need, seed money for housing development. Like, all of that is needed. So I'm not saying it's either or, good or bad, but the questions are very different. So definitely when you have donor advised funds pre-Katrina, these folk were just wealthy, mainly white folk who wanted to give out scholarships, who wanted to see wings built at the hospital, who wanted to renovate the art museum, these are the things that were on their mind. And that's what those folk were raising money for. When Katrina came, you could not, at that moment, ask that same set of questions.
Yeah.
And so, how has philanthropy changed over time? When you juxtapose at least these two examples, probably not a lot. Because those local funders weren't ready for George Floyd.
Yeah, let me ask this, because I knew that history, but I'm hearing it and feeling it a little bit differently because me and my two co-founders, Rapon Lolit, stood up the Black Collective Foundation following George Floyd's murder.
Mm-hmm.
In part because we felt too that there were different questions to be asked, and that there was a a gap in the space, right? There was opportunity for us to be convening differently, talking differently, funding differently. And we needed a place really for our hurt spirits to be moved creatively into developing, right? That out of this loss of life in this moment in time, we could respond with programs, but we also wanted to respond with building an institution, building something that could be sustained into perpetuity.
Right.
It has been more than a notion, raising money for it. It is legacy work. I'm committed to it. But what advice, what do you think has changed? What advice, if you had to look back at how that emerged, would you be able to give to me or others that are looking at institution building in the wake of, I don't know, identifying a gap or trying to move and build a response that looks different than the sector that it is in fact working in?
Yeah. So we can't go back in time, but, the Black collective that you all had developed, the hard time you're having now, you probably would have had a harder time pre, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Black-led organizations that focus on Black communities, even now, have historically been underfunded. There is an example from a colleague, actually more than one colleague, several colleagues, but a couple colleagues, Black leader, mixed race board, but mainly white boards and white men on these boards, and have had white male colleagues mostly, that's not to say white women don't do it too, say, I am tired of Black stuff. Tired of hearing about it. In my own experience, I put forth some HBCU funding, had a person say, putting money in HBCUs is a waste of money. Communities that we wanted to fund that have been, Black communities, this community is everywhere. George Floyd's community is everywhere, right? Putting money into that community, we might as well just take some money and burn it in the street. These are quotes. This is who's on our boards. Mm-hmm. This is who I have to sit there and figure out the counter argument to this mess that I'm having to talk about right now.
Yeah.
Not only do I have to figure out the counter argument, but I got to figure out that counter argument in such a way that I still get this funded. That's what I got to do every goddamn day. And it's no let up to it. So what brings me to the Black collective is you are asking for money from these same folk. Again, they could be in whatever shape or form, in any community, in a foundation, anywhere, right? Then every now and again, because for whatever reason, our own, self-hate and all that, we actually every now and again join in.
Okay, can we talk about that? Because right when you were saying it, I could literally.
That has not been my personal experience, but I have seen that occur. And you like, okay.
I see it occur in a couple different ways. One is that people will distance themselves. Those families, those parents over there, they need, like, they're distancing and they're somewhat judging, right? They're creating a judgment over people that have had less opportunity without context, which I think furthers the biases, right? The other thing that I hear a lot is this nonprofit industrial complex. And what it suggests is that good work is not happening. What it ignores is the lack of equal investment. There's a number of things. I'm not saying it's not a system that needs to be reckoned with, but I think that there is language that comes from our communities that can undermine the work that is happening because the framing the argument.
They got their one or two Black friends, and they will come in that boardroom and quote that one or two Black friend who may not even feel that way, might have just been expressing a frustration.
Right.
Right. They take those one or two folk and roll with it. Right. And and then we feed into it because, we get in this, whatever our goals are for service, who knows what they may be. And you get co-opted or your own self-hate comes out, or instead of calling out an internal bias or giving someone a history lesson. The reason this particular area of our city is the way it is because there was never any consistent investment in it. Like I can actually trace back how the white city council made decisions that invested in certain communities and not invested in other communities. We can actually trace that. That's why this history lesson, and people don't want to talk about institutional and structural racism and all. And I'm like, before 1970, we never got $2. You're talking about my home that I love, but I could never get that renovation loan. I couldn't get that loan. I couldn't even take out a second mortgage for my home to keep up so I can keep up with home values because I was X'd out of those loans, that ability to do so, right? Grants and the like for street lights and infrastructure and all that, all of that bypassed communities of color.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can really communities. Right. And you can layer this on to almost every issue, right? Education.
And you layer it onto
every know what was happening in education.
And this is why we are, right. So when we want to talk about a particular neighborhood, it's a waste of money to invest there. And I'm like, says who? Because if you talk to them, it's not a waste. And again, getting back to the field and the patriarchy, this need for hard measures and change, and it doesn't look precipitously different from when we first started funding. And here in the Delta region, I had funders. I mean, I'm talking about an exodus of funding in the Delta because they felt they had been funding in the Delta so long, nothing has changed. And therefore, we're going to stop funding. We reorganized what's called the Delta Philanthropy Forum, to try to attract monies for the Delta. But if you are looking for physical change, whatever the change you're looking for, and you don't see it or believe whatever sets of measures has shown progress, there is progress.
Yeah. Can we talk about that? Because there's so many things, but let's go down this because I have experienced this and it has been infuriating, to say the less, where we want to see the needle move on an issue that has been here forever. I'd like to believe that there are a lot of really good intended people that are looking to make investments that will make a difference. I don't think that we have I don't think they know what difference making looks like outside of a number, outside of whatever number, it's sort of myopic and narrow. And so what would you say to people that are looking at ROI? It's a math equation.
It is, but it is not. The kind of entrenched changes that philanthropy seeks to make is going to be incremental and long. And getting back to what we talked about structurally in this field and who's on these boards, incremental and long is generally not what people have the patience for. And it doesn't feel good, right? Doesn't feel good. So if you are looking to feel good and see something short term, then you will be of that charitable mindset. But if you're asking the question differently, like you all are doing at the Black Philanthropy Collective. If you ask the question that is about how do we make sure this doesn't occur again, or how do we ensure that future generations do not have this same experience, whatever the experience may be, or in the case of here, we want to figure out how, what are the alternatives? Because the whole defund the police thing was not about get rid of police, right? It was always about how can we use these dollars differently, to do reconciliation, to do, to learn how to deal with crime differently. Like the questions are different, right? But you use the word defund and all that, and it took its own life and people were able to run with it and weaponize it, even though that wasn't the intent. So anyway, that was a long way of saying in what you just described, it's a field in which the structural challenge will constantly be a challenge. Mm-hmm. And we are the ones that have to creatively figure out how to still get resources, because those resources are necessary for us to make the change we need to make. But we may never agree on the ROI.
Right.
And an ROI a grantee provides may not fit into the nice, neat number you want to have happen in your return. Mm-hmm. So recently had a meeting with a large billions of dollar foundation, local foundation here, who says that their lawyers, based on Supreme Court executive orders, et cetera, has compelled them to go back to only project-based grant making. And it hurt my heart. And I tried my best not to react, but I went, why would you set philanthropy back 30 years? Like, why would you do that? And this is a foundation that, if it behaved differently, could be a leader. If it behaved differently. But it has gone back to that level of conservatism. And I said, and they're funding and education equity, and we have a couple of joint grants. And I said, and so the person says to us, I won't tell you what I said because it wasn't good. So, but the person says back to us, so what are you, how, well, if in a year or 2 years, they don't X, Y, Z, then we will reconsider. And I'm like, but organizing takes more than 2 years. To get to that problem you're trying to solve. In this case, it was about teacher prep and developing a, turning over teacher prep in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. It's not just pipeline, even how teachers are being taught to teach, right? So that was the topic. How do you, teacher prep does not lend itself to project-based funding. And if these systems of teacher prep don't occur within the 2 years you've allotted, then what happens? Because what you're describing is disrupting a system. Disrupting that system requires a lot. Even in teacher prep, it requires a lot. First, you got to figure out who wants to disrupt the system. That could be 6 months in and of itself. Someone at the same time has to figure out what that disruption looks like. Most of the time, folk don't want to disrupt it because of accreditation, and they don't want to jeopardize their accreditation and violate accreditation standards. So already, this system is governed by a set of principles and governance that you're trying to do this intervention on that can go counter to what they need to make sure that they're in compliance to even do the kind of transformative change you're describing.
Right.
For them to even negotiate those kind of changes, that months of work. Mm-hmm. So unless your ROI is actually walking with that grantee step by step along the way, on what needs to be done. And this is just for one university to change or alter how it does its teacher preparation. I mean, I haven't even gotten a curriculum. I haven't even gotten to recruiting students who want to be taught in this way. I haven't even gotten to the schools you might have to convince to use your new technique, right? So this kind of transformative change requires commitment and money from the resource provider. This project by project approach, maybe you have thought through all these things, but what I'm hearing is we're going to give a grant for a year or two, possibly, and they have to do these things that I negotiate with them, not that you listen and respond to, but that you actually, so already you got a power dynamic in that. It's just jacked up in so many ways, right? Like it's just bad, regulatory, punitive, in ways that they probably don't intend in their heart of hearts. But as opposed to being focused on purpose, they're focused on compliance.
Yeah. And what I also hear, and tell me if I'm hearing it right, is that you have funders that are funding an outcome. They want an outcome, right? We want to have a teacher pipeline because we want to diversify the teaching pool. We have a teacher shortage, so we need to pipeline people into education. So they're funding for an outcome without even understanding what the problem and the barriers have been that created the condition to begin with. So they're jumping past a number of things that would inform the strategy. And then when the strategy doesn't work, they see it as a failure or not worth the investment.
Under this approach, yeah, it could go that way. And that's the challenge with ROI. Because if you're now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have measures and you shouldn't have return and you shouldn't have outcomes. Absolutely, positively, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, but if you're going into this saying, I want to have 5 new teacher preparation programs by the end of the year, and you haven't taken into account what all that would entail, and you only get 2, are you saying you're not going to continue?
Right.
Or because the process for that set of colleges and universities to disrupt itself and the accrediting board to say, this is how we believe we want to start preparing teachers for different futures. Again, I don't know how long that takes because I have not done the work myself. But just sitting here thinking about it, I'm sure that is not a conversation.
Agreed. So you just said that you've been in the field for 30 years. I hear you announced that you are retiring. 2 questions here. One is it easier to navigate the space now than it was when you first started? Just for your own leadership, what has the evolution of the navigation, how has that changed for you?
It's not gotten easier in all these years. It has not. Even when I was at Annie Casey Foundation and, working with colleagues and debating with colleagues and, talking through stuff and, you talk through your lived experience and what you know, and, it has not gotten any. And sometimes it could be worse when you got white folk who think they're doing right. They could be the worst ones that you got to negotiate with. They could be the worst. At least you know where the others are coming from and how they think and when someone who says or thinks that they're an ally, but yet everything they do is so contradictory or antithesis of what an ally should be.
Right.
They could actually be the worst.
Progressive
so it has not gotten easier. And I started out as a program associate and then eventually became CEO. I would say as CEO, the stakes are higher. My level of responsibility is high. I mean, it was high when I was a program associate, but it's much higher. I think of my office as CEO as not just a power position to dole out money. I see us as a strategic partner in the change we want to see in Arkansas. So I probably haven't made it easy to navigate because I view my role as that.
Mm-hmm.
I probably could have made it easier for myself. I just didn't, because that's not, it's a fight. It's a war. We got to make sure our advocacy and organizing organizations exist and are well-funded to do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
We have to ensure that our organizations that are working on the front line on, in our case, education, economic, and, racial and social equity, like, we have to make sure that they are girded and well-resourced, because they play a pivotal role. Like, that's how I come into this work. I don't come into this, who can I make friends with? What strategic alliances do I need so I can get in at the golf course? Like, that's not even my gig. Like, I actually want to see change happen in our state. And so I probably, to answer your question, probably didn't make it easier for myself, although I could have. Today, we're at the Capitol for ALYS, the ALYS Youth Coalition is up there, trying to train young people how to speak up for their communities.
Mm-hmm.
And funding them to do so. There are lots of folk who do not want this next generation to speak up for anything, much less be organized to do so. And you probably saw in the paper today that there's, legislation afoot in some states that if you're a state-funded institution, they're trying to squash any organizing and, any organizing of any type. They're trying to squash it. No one wants to see Columbia repeated, but no one steps back and says, well, freedom of speech is a thing. You have the right to peaceably assemble, right? Like these are things in our Constitution.
It feels like we just keep encountering sort of crisis after crisis at different levels and stages. I guess my question here is similar to what I just asked in terms of your navigation, but what barriers more broadly do you see that still exist specifically for Black women in leadership?
Yeah. That return on investment is still something, like, I feel as though the field itself hasn't really answered the return on investment question overall. And when you come into leadership, the demands for what are the numbers? What are the measures? How are you figuring this out? How do we know if you're a successful CEO if we don't have numbers to compare your progress against, right? And I'm like, this is social change. I could provide you numbers. I could. I'd be making them up, but I can provide, like, if that's what you need for us to move forward and get these grants out, I will do what you need me to do. And I will make some attempt to make reasonable numbers for which me and my team can meet. But you need a whole lot of flexibility. Understand this is incremental change. Like, so I'm gonna answer. So that's one way to answer your question is it's just it's a constancy that won't go away, because you will always have this faction. Well, not always. There will be this faction of your board, and they're usually the white members. Usually the white members who come in with the patriarch thinking that for you to get this money, you got to show me the numbers. And if you don't show me numbers, I don't think you should continue getting this money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually not how this should work.
Well, how should it work? Because people want an articulation of impact, right? Like, it was a stressful point that I was navigating at a time that was really challenging. And one of the things, Sherece, that I would say is, on the fundraising side, people get it, right? They know when there's a market fluctuation. They understand bull and bear market. They understand recession. They know that the stock, markets have dropped and that you're going to lose money, but you stay with it because the compound interest over time will get you to where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
On the community side, something happens, the trust equation drops. You went forward, now something happened, and there's disruption. And it's at that particular moment that people want to speed up the ROI. It's at the exact moment where you need more patience.
Correct.
And I could not get to the point of being able to successfully articulate. Let me back up. I did successfully articulate it. I couldn't get people to successfully hear my articulation of
Mm-hmm.
what was happening around that in the way that honored community and the work that I was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, for us, the way that I've been able to do so here is through impact reports. So we do collect numbers, right? We do, but those numbers mean nothing in the moment in time in which it's collected. But when you then look 3 years from now and 5 years from now they mean something.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we did an impact report that we presented last Friday at our board meeting was our funding for delivering on the dream. We're part of this coalition on delivering on the dream. Our goal here in Arkansas was to, promote Arkansas immigrants, but mostly immigrant integration. Was our general goal. We gave 1 point something million to delivering on the dream over a number of years. We were able to leverage an additional 1.36 over that time. That's a measure. That's an outcome, right? We were able to leverage and get stuff done. We were able to, again, over time, find that 63,000 immigrant families sought services from the grouping of 12 organizations that we funded that was a part of delivering the dream. So 63,000 families, of that 63, there's a percentage that did move on to citizenship and a percentage that did a few other things. We were also able to determine through research that we've done, every $1 an Arkansas immigrant spends, there is a $7 return to our state. Mm-hmm. That return includes, taxes and all, fees and the like. You get a $7 return. If you ask me for what I just described to you in a year, it wouldn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. But now we can look 3 years and 5 years. Now I got something to say. Now I have impact. I can now give you a return on investment. You needed to give me time to do this return on investment for you, meaning board and staff. But it requires time. Mm-hmm. And that's what project grants
don't do. They don't
do.
Yeah. So how do you, because as you said earlier, we still need investments in projects. We still need funders and philanthropists to respond in times of need. How would you invite people into seeing the balance between responsive philanthropy, programmatic investments, and long-term strategic change investment? Because I think sometimes people see them as all as one thing. And really what we've talked about is the delineation between different ways in which philanthropic dollars can support community movement or need, right? Responsive, programmatic, long-term systems change. They all should be looked at differently from an evaluative standpoint. They all have a different importance. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are meant to move the needle, but they're meant to address an issue or to support a program. But how would you invite people to see that differently? If at all, I might have just did it, but if at all.
Yeah. So one major challenge is that those who are doing the responsive and the short-term / long-term you described, they actually think that they're doing something. That's a big part of the problem. So an example would be, I actually have many. I got a gazillion examples, but I'll just give you two. Or one, maybe one, because one will demonstrate it. So I went to visit a colleague in South Carolina some couple years ago, and she wants to do systemic grant making, and she brought me in to talk with her board, me and a few others to talk with her board about this. Now, the moment I sat down and got in that room, I was like, So they were so excited. And we did a site visit as part of this exchange. They were so excited about an arts program that they were doing for returning citizens. And I mean, excited. Mm-hmm. And when you hear, again, white man talking to me, or us, but I personalized it because I was like, he was saying, wow, this arts program, it enables, our returning citizens to get into art and use their creative mind and da-da-da-da-da. And I said to myself, now, and there's nothing wrong with that program. Like, I'm good. But the way it's articulated is as if there was going to be some long-term systemic change. In that individual who experienced that program, I don't doubt for a moment that that person's heart, ability, whatever, I don't doubt for a moment that that program has made a change in him or her. And that change may even be reflected in his or her future generations. Mm-hmm. I don't doubt that for a moment. But if you're trying to tell me what you're funding is systemic change or long-term change, you were delusional. But there was, and I made a little attempt, not a big one, because I didn't want to get frustrated and I didn't want to mess up my friend's gig. So, I kind of walked up in it a little bit and could see that mindset, but they were in their hearts really thinking that they were doing long-term systemic change. And I'm like, you have changed maybe a couple of individuals, and probably their neighborhood and family is a little better. Yeah. But you have not changed not a goddamn thing around here, like at all. Right. Zippo. But you get these folk in these conversations, and they will tell you how funding that backpack program gets that young person a backpack, and then they can be successful in school, and they will graduate, they will go to college, and they will be good, productive citizens. I was like, baby, that backpack ain't gonna get you all that. But when you have this conversation, you cannot convince them otherwise. So that was a long way of saying the problem, a part of this challenge is that those folk are thinking, they're thinking like a systemic change funder, right? They really do. Yeah. And again, that's that charity, that's that institutional part that I was, that we started this conversation with. Right. And that institution continues to attract. It continues to attract what it was built to attract. Correct. Yeah. And you're also outlining additional barriers that Black women are navigating in the space. Right. And you got to sit there in real time and figure out how you going to get. First, you got to watch your facial expressions. Right. Then I got to channel. You got to watch your tone, your response. I cussed out everybody at that table in my head in my Gladys voice. Okay. But you know what I'm saying? So then you gotta think about how can you situate your words so that you don't mess up your friend's gig by essentially minimizing the expertise that you bring to the table. Because despite the expertise and the proximity, you know that is not enough for a winning argument. And all I do is scare white folk. And so I've actually stopped doing these visits now because you actually need someone white to be here with these folks. Like they actually need a peer because they're not going to hear me. I do not suffer from low self-esteem. Mm-hmm. I know that I speak well. I know, ain't nothing wrong with me. But I also know strategically, if you were trying to change your agenda, I might not be who you should put forth in front of your board. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I remember thinking through a committee structure in an organization that I was with, and they were sort of always insistent on me having a Black woman as
the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I am a Black woman. I need actually a white ally to sit in that seat. Because I am trying to translate and I need someone that can help me refine that a bit more and carry some of that differently than what I can already carry myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate the point that you just made. And we know that there are white allies that are sitting in spaces where one, as you decide, you said it, right? There are people that, I'm a white ally, and then you find out they're sort of down with the issue, but they're not really down with listening.
Not down with listening, and darn sure not down for the fight.
Right. So they're more like self-appointed allies.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's allies where we're like, girl, that's an ally. They ain't never said the word ally.
Right.
But 1,000%, they get it. What they don't get, they don't step in. They're saying the name, they're sponsoring, they're doing all the things. For those that are listening, that are aspiring to be an ally or trying to improve in their allyship, particularly with Black women, what advice would you give them?
I don't know. I don't know. Because it's either you are or you aren't. And if you got to work to get there, I don't know if I want you to hang out with me, like some of this stuff it has to be in your DNA. Like it actually it comes from a place that is not tangible.
Keep talking.
Yeah, it's not tangible. So I don't know if I can give you something to read. I don't even know if I can talk you into it. Yeah, because if you're not already there, so here we have a coalition of wealthy white women who, bless them, last year had taken up the charge on maternal health. It is led by two billionaire white women, pretty famous white women here. I'm not going to say their names, but whoever's listening or watching can look them up. They're not hard to find. Arkansas are not overrun with billionaires, so they won't be hard to figure out. I mean, we got a few, but it's not overrun. And so it's led by them, and to their credit, have taken the data and see the disparities amongst groups within the data, right? And even amongst poor women and poor white women, seeing that even within that category, there's a disproportionate number that are women of color. To their credit. And so as I'm listening and working with them and talking with them, and I got a colleague of mine involved with working with them because I can't do it day in, day out because I have a lot to do, but I can dedicate someone to work with you all from WRF. I came to several of those meetings and come in and out. Since this DEI, EO stuff has gone down, they pretty much disbanded. So you have the power to speak to this issue. You have the ear of state legislators. All of y'all are married to these people. All of y'all are married to these men, who are the power structure in our state, right? You're part of this power structure and you're married to participants in this power structure in our state. Regardless, your money ain't going nowhere. Like, you already there, right? You actually have freedom and autonomy, but have retreated from talking about those issues on behalf of women of color.
So there's a lot of retreat happening. And
if it wasn't in your heart and you weren't going to fight to begin with, you weren't.
You weren't. And I love the language of preemptive censorship, where people are fearing what's coming, so they're just retreating, which, to your point, says a lot about the dog in the fight that they had to begin with. The allyship question, I certainly appreciate the answer, because people can approach it as though there's a checklist to arrive to being an ally. If you do these 10 things, you arrive. And what I both heard you say and what I also saw you do, right? Like my interpretation of is that it is actually in you, right? It's how you be, it's your being, it's not your doing.
Correct.
That grounds you in being a good ally. That it also is set in relationships. It sits in learning and understanding where you can be helpful. Because a lot of what we're talking,
I'm sorry, the only reason I was even invited to that group was because I'm head of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. If I were just a regular old citizen, I wouldn't have been invited to that group because I don't hang with them.
Yeah.
At all. So I never would have even been a part of that. Now that we've been invited and we can influence it, but again, we've been like, well, where y'all at? What you doing? We're ready. I thought we had some strategy. I thought we were going to do some things. Doulas, like that, they got on the whole doula bandwagon. And how do we train doulas to go into these rural communities because there aren't hospitals and doctors, Let's figure out a doula system to put out there. I don't care what color you are, how much money you got. That ain't, I mean, come on now. How harmful is a doula system in rural America to ensure, that mothers have birthing coaches and et cetera? Why retreat from that? That was one of the strategies, and it rose to the top, the doula thing. But just all of it writ large. But for me, you have the autonomy. In other words, no one's going to mess with your bank. No one, because you already got it. Yeah. Actually, two of you even own banks. So there's no
right. And you're laying out another barrier or another consideration that has to be navigated, right? It is many of the relationships we're in are transactional.
Right.
Which is counterintuitive to how we relate to the world and the work, right? It's personal. I am the work. I am the community that I'm seeking to serve. And so there is no separation from that. But when you get invited and disinvited from tables, right, that like you don't know what those relationships are sitting in and you're having to navigate in that space is a challenge. What, as you had thought about leaving the field, how did you know? How did you know it was your time to announce retirement?
I just knew. It's interesting. You hear that from people who retire, regardless of the field. You hear that often. And they'll say, you just know. Like even a time when it's just time to leave your job, leave a relationship, like just whatever sets of things occur, you just know. It just, and for me, it was being, I was actually in Africa at the moment it happened. And, going about my day, sightseeing, touring, twirling around. I was by myself and, just this voice said, it's time. And I knew exactly what that voice, I knew exactly what God was saying. I knew what he was referring to, and I knew. And I came back home and my husband and I, we're in the garage, and the only reason we were in the garage because he was in the garage. And I need to talk to you about this. And so he was doing stuff in the garage, and then we actually wandered. I mean, it was light outside. By the time we finished talking, it got dark outside, right? So we put together a whole plan, a whole strategy, and how to go about it, and just kind of planned it out. And it was just this voice that said it's time.
Yeah.
And it's 18 years here. 18 years here. 13 and a half at KC, almost. Not quite 3 at Foundation for Louisiana. So, yeah.
Do you have a hope or a vision that you see for Black women in the field?
The hope that I have, what the vision I have is, that we don't die, we multiply, right? That's the vision I have. Because I just feel very strongly that Black women are all that, and we can do all things. And we darn sure could run your foundation and run it well, get you an ROI in time,
Right. Increase
Build
your
relationship
credibility. Yeah,
in
all of
time.
yeah.
Do systemic long-term change in time. Like we actually can get you where we need to get to. I believe that strongly. So my vision would just be more of us, but not just more for the sake of more. Like you actually have to be in it. Quality, solid, sound leader that's about this work. So that would be my vision. My hope would be that because this institution that is philanthropy, the way it was built, how it was founded, and how we still behave in this patriarch, in this institution, it's not going anywhere because it's an institution. It wouldn't be called an institution if it weren't an institution. It's not going anywhere. That institution is man-made. And just like man made it, man can unmake it, man can recreate it. It's not God-made, it is man-made. And so in it being man-made, my hope would be that we go into this field and actually shape it to do right by poor communities, communities of color, and all that we purport to serve.
There are a number, you mentioned leadership at the board level, and we know that there are Black women sitting in boardrooms that may be one or a few, that may be not as talkative, or maybe are saying things that are different at the table.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to them in terms of their voice at those tables, or to the table about listening to Black women, either way or both? What would you say?
Yeah, so I was actually on a corporate board and I got fired. I was fired from that board because it was all about making money for this person. And it was about making money. Yeah, making money because it's on the stock exchange. So I don't want to make it sound like,
Mhm. I mean, that's business's role, right? To make money.
Yeah, but it's about making money. But in this case, because it was a relatively medium-sized corporation and the like, and more regional. And I couldn't do it. I used my voice on that board to speak up and to ask the folk on that board to change its behavior, the institution that I was a part of, to change its behavior to be more in service, to put stuff in Spanish. Like, I'm like, well, it is 2000 and whatever. And I'm still telling people put stuff in Spanish, that's a true story. Anyway, I was a bugaboo and got on their nerves. So therefore I had to go. I understood where they was coming from. They understood where I was coming from. I got fired. I was good. Now, the reason I start the response in that way is this. I needed to use and exercise and I was on that board for about 6 years before I got fired. Because I tried. They tried and I tried. And it could have been a lifelong appointment, but I couldn't make it. Those kinds of conversations, when you come from a social justice point of view, can be hard when these folk don't. So one, I would say to those women, do your best to get matched as best you can. Mm-hmm. And really, because when they were interviewing me, I really thought, I didn't delude myself into thinking I could make change, but they actually claimed they wanted the change I was talking about, but resisted it every step of the way, the whole entire way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This board, including the one or two Black folk who were on this board, except for me, in that first election, voted for who we have as president.
I got you. So don't accept every board seat.
Really don't accept every board seat. Scrutinize it, think it through, because it just may not be for you. Mm-hmm. As strategic as I am in being able to get stuff done on my own board and several other boards where I still run into the same challenge, I was never able to penetrate that board. Yeah. And I would say study and learn how you can influence and penetrate the thinking, and if that's what you desire, because you may not, and that's okay too. But if this organization can use its dollars or its thinking or the like strategically and differently to influence communities you care about, just figure that thing out. Try to figure that thing, because it may not be automatic. It may not be natural to them or to you. Mm-hmm. And I would also say, if you go on that board, and it is about you, because, it was a nice paycheck for a little while. I had to pay a lot of taxes. So for me, it was a wash. But, because I'm not in that upper income range, although I got board members who say I make too much money. But I'm not in that range where that extra money made a difference. I actually had to pay back like probably a third of it in taxes, because I'm still in a tax bracket that required that. So you just really would, and the reason I bring that up is because you really got to figure out, is this really worth your time if you have a social justice heart? Because these can be extremely frustrating, disappointing opportunities. If you're going in there with a social justice heart and their heart is about making that company or corporation make more money, and the two may not meet.
Yeah. So I also hear that if you're going to be in the seat, you should have a plan on how you influence while you're there, which is going to be a different approach than what you have in your other role. You're going to have to learn the language and sort of widen your strategy to be at the table. That's really helpful. And then also understanding the time equation or the financial equation and whether or not it's worth it.
For me now, because I'm maybe upper middle class now. So for me and my little upper middle classness, absorbing that extra money, just it was actually more of an expense than it was a help. One, and two, for what I had to do and endure to get it. In the end, it was worth it because it was such a lesson that I might not have been able to get in that kind of concentrated way on Tea Party / conservative / uber rich white men thinking. So I appreciated my time because it gave me exposure I would not have gotten otherwise. And they actually toughened me to be more effective in my day job. So I did get something out of service. But it didn't turn out to be the kinds of things I wanted to get out of it.
Yeah, I think that's good. Do you feel comfortable with the legacy that you have in philanthropy? Do you feel like you've left anything unturned?
So as you go through life, I don't know about you. I don't sit there and go, what is my legacy? I just don't do that, right? I work. I try to do good so that I can sleep well at night. That's how I live my day to day. Now that I do have to describe or talk about my legacy, I realize I have left behind some good stuff, and pretty proud of what I've done and what I've accomplished thus far. Yesterday, someone came in for a meeting and was going down the road of, it wasn't easy, wasn't this, wasn't that. And I said, I could nitpick at moments and times and people and all that didn't go well, that was negative, bad. But if I take it in its totality, it has been the biggest blessing. And I am so grateful. So I'm sure I'm going to have to decompress, because you hear some of the examples I gave you about why fund that community? That's a waste of money. HBCUs are a waste of time. Like all of that stuff. Let's be clear. It is soul sapping. It is harmful. It hurts. It really does. And I've learned to develop balance and leave work where work needs to be, and enjoy life in ways that I can enjoy life. So it's not been a legacy that was a walk in the park by any stretch, unless your walk in the park includes getting mugged, raped, pillaged, kidnapped, beat up.
Moments. I get that. I get that.
You fell in a ditch.
What I love about the full circle. Yeah, I'm telling you, what I love about
still a lovely walk in the park.
It's still a lovely walk, and I saw some pretty flowers
Right.
that I got, hit from the side. Then I stood up and I saw a nice tree. I mean, that's a little like life. And what I like about sort of the full circle moment of this is when we started, we were talking about Gladys and the way in which we do our work is always being observed.
Yes.
We don't even know who is always watching when we're in these roles. And therefore, we don't know how we're inspiring, how their leadership will emerge differently as a result of that inspiration or that interaction. And, with the passing of Gladys, being able to hear little stories and little moments, none of them were about big projects.
Right. Yeah,
It's
all about how she made us feel.
It was all about how, like her commitment to the work, her dedication, her willing to embrace the hard moments. And I've heard nothing but that in the conversation that we shared, that leadership, you could see all the good pieces, the title, all of that. But underneath it is a lot of navigation and a lot of battles that are left unseen and scars that won't necessarily heal or aren't visible to the public. And we're doing that in service, not to ourselves, but to our community and to progress. And I think that's one of the most important voices in the values of Black women in philanthropy, is that there's very few of us in these conversations that are not willing to lay their life on the line.
Yeah.
To have the type of change that we want to see for our own communities, for our own families, for our future generations, right? Progress against all of the things that we know that have been in despair in our communities and in our neighborhoods and our homes. We're working very hard to eliminate the challenges of just equal opportunity.
Yeah.
So thank you for everything that you have done to lay yourself, to lay your heart, to lay your body on the line in this work we call philanthropy.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you and to share. I feel like I just been to a therapy session.
It was good. I was like,
about things in a cathartic way that that I hadn't even considered. I may go home and do so. I journal all the time, but I may go home and journal even more now that I've evoked some thoughts from this conversation. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I feel like I just had a masterclass. I hope the listeners did too. Thank you for being on Centering Conversations. That's it for this episode of Centering Conversations. Thank you for tuning in and centering yourself with us today. Remember, your voice has power, your vision has purpose, and your values guide your leadership and the way forward. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected for more conversations that inspire, ignite, and empower. Until next time, keep calling forth your purpose and centering your power.